The smell hit Eleanor first, industrial bleach fighting a losing battle against desperation. She stood frozen in the doorway of Haven of Hope, her Hermes purse worth more than the shelter's monthly budget weighing heavy on her shoulder. Then she heard it. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." A young woman in a faded University of Virginia t-shirt knelt beside an elderly man, spooning soup into his trembling mouth with infinite patience. The fluorescent lights caught something at her throat, 3 strands of Tahitian pearls that Eleanor had clasped around a 5-year-old's neck 15 years ago, the day they buried her parents. The birthmark below the girl's left ear confirmed what the $50,000 necklace suggested. Eleanor's knees buckled. Her granddaughter heir to $10 million, descendant of real estate royalty. The last Hartwell of her generation was feeding homeless strangers in a Miami shelter. The purse hit the floor. Everyone turned, except Lila. Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. Eleanor Hartwell had built an empire from ashes. At 25, she'd inherited $100,000 and her parents' funeral bills. By 54, Hartwell Properties commanded a $500 million portfolio across 7 states. She'd learned early that grief could be transformed into fuel, that pain could be converted into profit margins, marriage children. Those were vulnerabilities she couldn't afford. "Love is leverage others can use against you," she'd told Daniel once. Her brother had laughed, married Sarah anyway, and proved her right by dying. The plane crash in 2010 took them both Daniel instantly. Sarah 6 hours later in the hospital, long enough to whisper something about Lila that Eleanor couldn't bear to remember. 5-year-old Lila had stood at the double funeral, clutching a teddy bear, wearing the pearl necklace Eleanor had impulsively clasped around her neck. It was the only maternal gesture Eleanor had ever managed. The trust fund was established within 72 hours. $10 million, ironclad, managed by Goldman Sachs. Eleanor had handed custody to her older sister Maggie with the same efficiency she'd sign a property transfer. "You have the maternal instinct I lack," she'd said. Maggie had nodded, already calculating. Eleanor hadn't noticed. She was already back in New York, building higher walls of glass and steel. For 15 years. Eleanor's involvement consisted of monthly wire transfers and quarterly financial reports. Maggie sent photos occasionally, Lila at ballet recitals, school plays, graduation. Eleanor filed them with her tax documents, unexamined. What Eleanor didn't know, Lila had discovered the trust fund at 16. Maggie had presented her with documents, tears, and a terrible choice. "Your grandmother made a mistake in 2018, tax evasion. Federal prison if I don't protect her." The girl had signed away $10 million to save a grandmother she'd never really known. At 18, she'd left Maggie's Richmond mansion with $1,000 and a need to discover who she was without the Hartwell name. Haven of Hope occupied a forgotten corner of downtown Miami. 50 beds, 1 shower per 10 residents, and dignity served 3 times daily with meals. Grace Thompson ran it like she'd once run marketing departments with precision and purpose, having found both after her daughter's overdose. Walter Morrison, 72, had designed bridges before Alzheimer's stole his blueprints. Harold Baker quoted Aristotle while mopping floors, his Princeton tenure a casualty of the 2008 collapse. Ruth Chen volunteered 60 hours a week, fighting loneliness since her husband's death. And Luna, an arthritic golden retriever with cloudy eyes, who still somehow knew who needed her most. The Miami conference had been routine, another waterfront development, another $100 million in projected revenue. Eleanor had chosen the shelter randomly from her assistant's list of local charities, the same way she'd selected them quarterly for 15 years. Tax-deductible compassion. Her accountant called it. The photo opportunity would take 20 minutes maximum. But now, 40 minutes later, she remained frozen behind a support column, watching her granddaughter tenderly wipe soup from Walter's chin. The old man's hands shook violently, Parkinson's or withdrawal. Eleanor couldn't tell. Lila steadied them with her own, guiding the water glass to his lips. "That's it. Walter, you're doing beautifully," Lila murmured. Her voice carried Sarah's same musical cadence, the one that had charmed Daniel at a Richmond cotillion 25 years ago. Now, let's work on your letters. Remember WALTER. She produced a worn notebook, helped him grip the pencil. His hand trembled across the page, producing shaky lines that barely resembled letters. "I can't," he whispered. "I designed the Bay Bridge approach. Now I can't even write my name." "You can," Lila insisted gently. "Your hands remember things your mind forgets. Trust them." Eleanor watched her move through the shelter's main room like a dancer navigating a familiar stage. She distributed medications from a locked cabinet, knowing each resident's prescription by heart. She read Keats to Harold while he folded donated clothes, his professorial voice occasionally correcting her pronunciation. She guided Ruth through physical therapy exercises, the former nurse now patient, their roles reversed by time's cruel mathematics. When someone called out, "Angel, we need you in the kitchen," Lila responded instantly. Angel. They didn't even know her real name. Eleanor fled to the Ritz-Carlton, her hands shaking as she dialed Thomas Wright, the private investigator who'd handled delicate matters for Hartwell Properties. "I need everything on Lila Hartwell. Current address, employment, education, everything. Especially the last 2 years. Your granddaughter, is there a problem?" Eleanor stared at her reflection in the hotel mirror, perfect makeup, perfect suit, perfectly empty eyes. "I don't know yet." Day 2 arrived with Miami's crushing humidity. Eleanor stood outside Haven of Hope at 4:45 a.m., wearing jeans she'd had to buy from Target. She hadn't owned casual clothes in 20 years. The shelter's door opened at 5 exactly. Lila emerged, tying her hair back, and Eleanor slipped inside with the handful of other early volunteers. The kitchen was industrial, impersonal, inadequate. Lila worked with 3 others to transform 50 pounds of donated potatoes, expired bread, and questionable eggs into breakfast for 50 people. She knew every dietary restriction, every allergy, every preference. Mr. Patterson couldn't have dairy. Maria needed extra protein for her diabetes. Harold wanted his eggs over easy. Like Princeton Dining Hall, circa 1975. Eleanor watched from the dish pit, hidden behind industrial steam and borrowed clothes. Lila's routine was a symphony of small kindnesses. She woke Walter gently, knowing sudden movements frightened him. She checked Luna's arthritis, massaging the dog's hips before the day's therapy rounds. She led a job search workshop for younger residents, teaching resume skills with patience that would shame most professors. During the afternoon thunderstorm, when Luna cowered under a table, Lila sat on the floor for an hour, singing softly until the dog's trembling stopped. The same song Sarah had sung to baby Lila during Virginia thunderstorms. Grace Thompson noticed Eleanor on day 3. The shelter director approached during lunch service, her knowing eyes taking in Eleanor's designer shoes, the one thing she couldn't bear to buy at Target. "You've been watching our Angel," Grace said. It wasn't a question. Eleanor's throat constricted. Angel. That's what everyone calls her. She arrived 2 years ago with $1,000 cash and a request to volunteer, never talks about family, never complains, never misses a day. Grace studied Eleanor's face. "She's the best thing that's happened to this place. The residents would die for her. Some probably have stayed alive for her. Is she happy?" Grace considered this. "She's at peace. There's a difference. Happy suggests something temporary. Peace is deeper. She's found something here that money can't buy, purpose without price tags." Eleanor watched Lila teaching Walter to write again. Infinite patience despite his daily forgetting. "What does she want, Bean? Nothing?" Grace replied. "That's what makes her extraordinary. She wants nothing except to serve." Day 4. Evening. The shelter quieted after dinner, residents settling into their routines. Eleanor found Lila in the common room, reading to Walter. The book's cover made Eleanor's breath catch the velveteen rabbit. Pages yellowed, binding cracked. "Real isn't how you are made," Lila read softly. "It's a thing that happens to you, When a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real. Eleanor's voice cracked as she spoke from the doorway. That was your mother's favorite book. Lila's hand stilled on the page. She didn't turn around. Walter dozed in his chair, peaceful, unaware of the earthquake happening in the silence. She read it to me every night, Lila said quietly. Even in the hospital. That last day, she could barely speak. But she whispered about becoming real through being loved. Eleanor stepped into the room. Each footstep felt like crossing years. Lila. Her granddaughter finally turned. No surprise flickered in those eyes, Sarah's eyes, Daniel's stubborn chin, Eleanor's own sharp cheekbones. I know who you are, grandmother. The word hung between them like an accusation and an absolution. 15 years compressed into 30 seconds of silence. Walter stirred, mumbled something about blueprints. Lila turned back to him, continuing to read through tears that fell silently onto the yellowed pages. It doesn't happen all at once. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily, or have sharp edges, or who have to be carefully kept. Eleanor stood there, a stranger in designer shoes, listening to her granddaughter read about becoming real to a man who'd forgotten his own name. She understood finally what she'd spent 15 years avoiding. Some breaks couldn't be fixed with money. Some edges couldn't be softened with distance. Some people, carefully kept in towers of glass and steel, never became real at all. The shelter's chapel occupied a converted storage room, 8 feet by 10, with a single stained glass window someone had salvaged from a demolished church. The Virgin Mary's face was missing, leaving only her blue robe catching the streetlight. Eleanor and Lila sat on opposite ends of a donated pew that creaked with their breathing. How long have you known? Eleanor asked. That you were here. 3 days. That you existed always. Lila pulled a manila folder from beneath the pew. She'd been prepared for this moment. You're not exactly invisible. Forbes, Wall Street Journal, Architectural Digest. She spread the clippings between them. A decade of Eleanor's achievements in newsprint. I followed your career like other kids follow pop stars. Why didn't you ever? Eleanor stopped. The answer was obvious. She'd made herself unreachable by design. Aunt Maggie said you preferred it this way. Clean, professional, uncomplicated. Lila's voice held no accusation, just fact. She said you sent money because money was your language of love. Eleanor's chest tightened. The trust fund. $10 million. Where is it? Lila reached deeper into the folder, producing a legal document dated January 15, 2021. The letterhead was Authentic Morrison, Kravitz and Associates, Maggie's lawyers. Eleanor recognized her own signature on the trust documents, establishing the fund. But there was another signature, Lila's, shaky, 16 years old. I signed it away, Lila said simply. Eleanor's hands trembled as she read, complete relinquishment of rights, irrevocable, transfer of all funds to Margaret Hartwell as guardian and sole beneficiary. Why? The word came out as a whisper. Lila pulled out another document, this one on IRS letterhead. Aunt Maggie came to my room crying. January 2021, right after my 16th birthday. She said you'd made a terrible mistake in 2018. Tax evasion on the Richmond development. She had these documents. Showed me federal sentencing guidelines. 10 to 15 years. She said, for someone your age, it would be life. Eleanor stared at the papers. The Richmond development had been completely legitimate. Every tax paid. Every form filed. Her team of accountants was legendary for their thoroughness. This is fake. I know that now. Lila's voice remained steady. But at 16, with my aunt sobbing about family loyalty, with official-looking documents, I thought I was saving you. She said if I signed over the trust fund, she could make it disappear, pay off whoever needed paying, keep you out of prison. You gave up $10 million for someone you'd never really met. You were the only family I had left besides her, and you were building something beautiful. Lila touched one of the articles, Eleanor breaking ground on affordable housing in Detroit. I couldn't let Aunt Maggie destroy that. Even if you didn't want me in your life, you deserve to finish what you'd started. Eleanor's phone buzzed. Thomas Wright. Need to see you immediately. Urgent discoveries about Hartwell. I have to go, Eleanor said, standing abruptly. Lila nodded, unsurprised. You always do. The accusation in her quietness was worse than anger would have been. Eleanor fled. Thomas Wright's hotel suite had been transformed into an investigation center. Documents covered every surface. Laptop screens glowed with financial records, and his assistant sorted through boxes of additional files. Your sister is a master manipulator, Thomas began without preamble. The IRS documents are forgeries, but excellent ones. She used authentic forms, real watermarks, even got the sequential numbering right. But she made one mistake: the signature of the IRS agent. Robert Kilbourne retired in 2017, a year before these were supposedly issued. Eleanor sank into a chair. How? She's been planning this for years, maybe decades. Thomas pulled up financial records. The grudge goes back to 1994. Your parents' will. They left you the company because Maggie had a gambling problem. Did you know she'd embezzled $40,000 from the family business? Eleanor's stomach turned. No. Your parents covered it up, paid it back, but changed their will. Maggie got a trust fund, comfortable but controlled. You got the company. She's resented it ever since. Thomas showed her more documents. She's been documenting your every move, collecting your signatures from family documents, studying your business practices. When Daniel died and you handed her Lila, she saw her chance. She used a child, her own niece, as a weapon against me. Worse. Thomas pulled up bank records. She's been living off the trust fund's interest, European vacations, luxury cars, a penthouse in Georgetown, all while telling Lila they were getting by. The girl thought Maggie was struggling financially, part of why she signed it over. Eleanor thought she might vomit. Can we prosecute? Absolutely. Fraud, forgery, manipulation of a minor, fiduciary breach. She'd get 20 years minimum. Eleanor stood to leave, then turned back. Find out everything about Lila's life with Maggie. Everything. Back at the shelter, night had fallen. Eleanor found Lila in the kitchen, alone, prepping breakfast potatoes for tomorrow. The industrial peeler moved rhythmically in her hands. You came back, Lila said without looking up. I know what Maggie did, all of it. The peeler stopped. And we can get the money back. Prosecute her. You could have your inheritance. I don't want it. Lila resumed peeling. I never wanted it. Eleanor moved closer. She stole from you, manipulated you, used your love against you. Yes. Lila's hands never stopped moving. And I chose to let her, not because I was weak, but because I refused to let money define me. I had a choice: live as a victim or live as myself. I chose myself. You chose poverty. I chose freedom. Lila set down the peeler, finally meeting Eleanor's eyes. Do you know what happened after I left Aunt Maggie's house? I worked at a grocery store. I cleaned offices at night. I learned that I could survive without the Hartwell name or money. I learned who I was when I wasn't anybody's granddaughter or heir. And who are you? Lila smiled Sarah's smile, but earned through her own struggles. I'm someone who knows that every person sleeping in this shelter has a story as complex as ours. Walter designed bridges that millions drive across. Harold taught philosophy to future senators. Ruth saved lives for 40 years before medical bills took her home. They're not the homeless. They're people who got caught when the safety net had holes. Eleanor watched her granddaughter return to the potatoes. You were accepted to law schools. Lila's hands paused for just a moment. Harvard, Yale, and Stanford. Full scholarships not because I'm a Hartwell, but because I scored in the 99th percentile on the LSAT. Why didn't you go? Because law school teaches you about justice in theory. These people teach me about injustice in practice. I want to learn from them first, then maybe I'll be ready to fight for them in courtrooms. Eleanor picked up a potato and a peeler. Her manicured nails were immediately ruined. Show me how to do this. Lila's surprise lasted only a second. Hold it like this. Long strokes, away from your body. Try to get the peel in one continuous strip. It's meditative. They stood side by side, peeling potatoes in silence. 50 pounds would feed 50 people breakfast. It would take them 3 hours. Eleanor's back ached after 30 minutes. Her hands cramped after an hour. Lila worked steadily, humming Sarah's lullabies. You could have called me, Eleanor said finally. When Maggie showed you those papers, I would have told you they were fake. Would you have taken my call? Lila asked gently. You never called me. 15 years, not one call. I thought about reaching out so many times, but I realized you didn't want me to. Your silence was its own message. The truth of it cut deeper than any accusation. Eleanor had built walls so high she'd forgotten there were people on the other side wanting to climb them. I was afraid, Eleanor admitted, the words foreign on her tongue. After Daniel died, I was afraid that if I loved you, I'd lose you too. It was easier to send money than to risk sending my heart. Hearts are meant to be risked, Lila said. That's what Walter told me yesterday, during one of his clear moments. He said the bridges he designed were built to sway in earthquakes. Rigid things break, flexible things survive. Eleanor looked at her granddaughter, 20 years old, wise beyond her years, kind despite every reason not to be. I don't know how to be flexible. Then learn, Lila said simply. Start by staying. The kitchen timer buzzed. 3 hours had passed. 50 pounds of potatoes were ready for tomorrow's breakfast. Eleanor's hands were raw, her back screamed, and she'd never felt more accomplished. Same time tomorrow? Lila asked. Eleanor nodded, surprising herself. Same time tomorrow. As they left the kitchen, Eleanor noticed Lila had kept one potato peel, the longest one, unbroken, spiraling like DNA. She hung it in the window where it would dry, a small reminder that even the humblest work, done with intention, could create something beautiful. Thomas Wright's investigation had turned into an archaeology of resentment. In his hotel suite, he walked Eleanor through 30 years of her sister's bitterness, each document another layer of sediment. It started in 1994, he explained, spreading bank records across the conference table. Maggie had been skimming from your father's construction supply company. Small amounts at first, a few hundred here, 1,000 there. Classic gambling addiction pattern. Eleanor stared at a canceled check in her father's handwriting, $40,000 to settle accounts. Her father's cramped notation in the margin, last time. Your parents never told you. They said Maggie needed help with debt. I was 24, working 18-hour days to establish the New York office. I didn't ask questions. Thomas pulled out the will, amended just 2 months before her parents' car accident. Originally, the company was to be split equally. After the embezzlement, they changed it. You got the business. Maggie got a structured trust she couldn't touch the principal on. She called me the night they died, Eleanor remembered suddenly. Not to comfort me, to ask when the will would be read. The pattern continued. Thomas showed credit reports, court records, divorce papers. Her first husband left her in 2001. She'd taken out credit cards in his name, maxed them at casinos. Her second husband lasted 3 years before discovering she'd remortgaged their house twice, both times. She convinced family members to bail her out. And I gave her Lila. Eleanor's voice was hollow. I handed her the ultimate gambling chip. She was strategic about it. Thomas displayed a timeline. For the first few years, she was careful. raised Lila well enough to avoid suspicion. But as the girl got older, Maggie got bolder. Look at these purchases starting in 2019. The receipts painted a picture of grotesque excess: a Mercedes-Benz S-Class, a Georgetown penthouse, monthly trips to Monaco, designer clothing worth more than most Americans' annual salaries. Meanwhile, Thomas continued, pulling out another file. She told Lila they were surviving on her pension from her brief teaching career. The girl wore second-hand clothes, worked part-time jobs through high school, believed they were one crisis away from poverty. Eleanor studied a photograph 16-year-old Lila in an ill-fitting dress at what appeared to be a school function, while Maggie's credit card statements from the same week showed $5,000 spent at Nordstrom. The psychological manipulation was masterful, Thomas added. She isolated Lila from you completely, painted herself as the struggling martyr, then presented the fake IRS documents as a family crisis only Lila could solve. The girl never stood a chance. Eleanor's hands shook. Where's Maggie now? Still in Georgetown, still spending. The trust fund has about $500,000 left. At her current burn rate, she'll be broke in 6 months. Eleanor left Thomas's hotel and drove aimlessly through Miami. Finally parking at the beach, she sat on the hood of her rental car, watching waves crash against the shore, and for the first time since Daniel's funeral, she cried. Not the controlled tears of a public memorial, but body-shaking sobs that left her gasping. She remembered Daniel's last voicemail, still saved on her phone after 15 years. "El, we're about to take off. Listen, if anything ever happens to us, promise me you'll take care of Lila. Really take care of her, not just financially. She needs family. El, promise me." She'd promised. Then they'd crashed, and she'd translated "take care" into wire transfers and trust funds. A knock on her windshield made her jump. Grace Thompson stood there with 2 cups of coffee. "Saw your car from the boardwalk," Grace said, climbing onto the hood beside her. "You look like someone discovering that money can't buy the only thing that matters." "How did you know?" "Because I've been there." Grace stared at the ocean. "I was a marketing executive, Fortune 500, 7 figures. Thought I was successful until my daughter Maya called me from rehab. Not to ask for help, to tell me she'd gotten clean despite me, not because of me. Said I'd been so busy earning money to give her things that I'd never given her myself." "What happened to her?" "She died anyway. Overdose. 2 years clean. Her dealer laced something wrong." Grace's voice remained steady. "I spent a year wanting to die too. Then I realized Maya's death could mean something if I stopped other parents from making my mistake. That's why I run the shelter, to remember that people aren't problems to solve with checkbooks." They sat in silence, watching pelicans dive for fish. "Your granddaughter is extraordinary," Grace said finally. "But she's also deeply lonely. She connects with everyone but lets no one truly close. Classic behavior of someone who learned early that love comes with conditions." Eleanor returned to the shelter at sunrise, finding Lila teaching Walter his name again. The old man's face lit up when he successfully wrote the W. "I did it," Walter exclaimed. "I wrote it?" "You did," Lila confirmed, though Eleanor had watched her do this same exercise yesterday. "You're brilliant, Walter." The old man beamed, then noticed Eleanor. His expression shifted, confused. "Who's she?" "A friend," Lila said. "She's here to help." "Good," Walter said decisively. "We need all the help we can get. Did you know I designed the Bay Bridge approach?" "He tells everyone that," Harold said, passing with his morning coffee and philosophy book. "Course, it happens to be true. 1987 retrofit after Loma Prieta. His design saved thousands of lives in the next quake." Eleanor spent the morning learning the residents' stories. Each one was a novel of American dreams deferred. Harold had tenure at Princeton until he'd backed the wrong political candidate and found himself quietly pushed out. His pension had vanished in 2008. His wife had left him for someone with better prospects, and his pride had prevented him from asking for help until it was too late. Ruth had been head nurse at Miami General for 30 years. Then her husband got pancreatic cancer. Insurance covered the first round of treatment but called the second experimental. She'd mortgaged everything, Sold everything, borrowed everything. He'd died anyway. The medical bills had taken her house 6 months later. I saved lives for 3 decades, Ruth said, teaching Eleanor how to properly wrap Walter's arthritic wrists. Never thought I'd need saving myself. Around noon, Luna collapsed in the common room. The golden retriever's breathing was labored, her aged body finally surrendering to 12 years of hard living. Lila dropped to the floor beside her, and the entire shelter seemed to stop breathing. She needs a vet, someone said. She needs surgery, Ruth corrected, her trained hands examining the dog. Tumor on her spleen, I'd guess. Been growing for months. How much? Grace asked quietly. 5,000? Maybe more. The silence was deafening. The shelter's monthly budget was 8,000 total. Eleanor pulled out her phone. I'll cover it. No? Lila's voice was firm. Luna is ours. We take care of our own. This is ridiculous, Eleanor snapped. I have money. The dog needs surgery. Let you buy us, Harold interrupted. Forgiveness, absolution. That's what the wealthy always do, throw money at problems instead of understanding them. That's not, isn't it? Harold's professor voice was gentle but cutting. When's the last time you solved a problem without your checkbook? The residents organized a fundraiser that afternoon. They had nothing but gave everything. Walter donated his engineering medal from the city. Ruth offered free medical consultations to anyone who'd contribute. Harold would teach philosophy to donors. Someone suggested a car wash, another a bake sale. This is insane, Eleanor told Lila privately. These people need their resources for themselves. No, Lila corrected. They need their dignity. You can't buy that for them. They have to earn it, keep it, protect it themselves. Eleanor watched the shelter transform into a hive of activity. Signs were painted, calls were made, and social media posts were crafted. By evening, they'd raised $800. Not enough, but more than Eleanor had expected. That night, Eleanor and Lila sat in a 24-hour diner, sharing stories over coffee that tasted like burnt rubber. Tell me about my father, Lila said suddenly. Not the successful contractor, the person. Eleanor pulled out her phone, scrolling to photos she'd hidden in a password-protected folder. Daniel was light, where I was all sharp edges and ambition. He was warmth and laughter. He could make anyone feel like the most important person in the room. She showed Lila a picture from 1999, Daniel teaching Eleanor to swing dance at their parents' anniversary party. He was the only person who could make me relax. Elle, he'd say. You're building an empire, but who's going to live in it with you? You miss him. Every day? But I buried the missing under contracts and construction. It was easier than feeling it. Lila pulled out a worn journal. I wrote letters to you. Never sent them, but wrote them. She opened to a random page, dated 2 years ago. Dear grandmother, I graduate tomorrow. I wish you could see who I've become despite everything, or maybe because of everything. I learned to be strong from your distance, learned to be kind from others' cruelty, learned to be generous from having nothing to give but myself. Eleanor's throat constricted. I wrote to you too, emails I never sent. She pulled up her drafts folder, dozens of messages started and abandoned. I didn't know how to explain 15 years of silence. We're experts at almost connecting, Lila observed with sad wisdom. Daniel would have hated this, Eleanor said. The distance, the formality. He'd have driven to Richmond and dragged me there himself. Mom, too. She believed in showing up. The last thing she said to me, Lila's voice caught. She said, baby, love is a verb, not a noun. Remember that. And they sat with that truth between them. 2 women separated by choices and chances, slowly building a bridge, one conversation at a time. The next morning, Luna's surgery was scheduled despite the fundraiser falling short. An anonymous donor had covered the remaining $4,000. Everyone suspected Eleanor, but she denied it. Only Lila noticed Harold tucking a pawn shop receipt into his pocket, his Rolex, a Princeton retirement gift, the last valuable thing he'd owned. When she confronted him, he quoted Aristotle, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. I know I'm meant to teach. That dog teaches joy better than I ever taught philosophy. Simple investment decision." Eleanor observed it all, the sacrifice, the solidarity, the stubborn dignity of people society had written off. She watched Lila navigate their world with grace, never condescending, never pitying, always respecting. That evening, while Luna recovered at the veterinary hospital, the shelter celebrated with a potluck dinner made from donations and food bank supplies. Eleanor sat between Walter and Ruth, eating spaghetti that was somehow both overcooked and undercooked, listening to stories of America she'd never heard from her penthouse office. "You're learning," Harold observed, passing her bread that was definitely past its prime. "The wealthy think poverty is about lacking money, but it's really about lacking choices. Money just buys options." "What options would you buy?" Eleanor asked. Harold considered. "Time? I'd buy time to write my book on ethics in late capitalism. Ruth would buy her house back, not for the property but for the memories. Walter would buy his mind back, if such things were for sale. And Lila, what would you buy?" Lila looked around the table, 50 people sharing inadequate food with abundant joy. "Nothing. Everything I need is free. It just took losing $10 million to discover that." Eleanor felt something shift in her chest, tectonic plates of a lifetime's assumptions grinding against new understanding. She'd spent 30 years building an empire. These people, with nothing, had built a community. The call came at 2:07 a.m. Eleanor had been lying awake in her hotel room, staring at the ceiling. When her phone buzzed, Grace's voice was controlled but urgent. "It's Walter. You need to come now." Eleanor had never driven so fast through empty streets. She found the shelter in controlled chaos. Ruth directing residents with medical training. Harold calling 911. Grace keeping others calm. But it was the sound that drew Eleanor Lila's voice, singing through tears. Walter lay on the common room floor, his head cradled in Lila's lap. His breathing was labored, asymmetrical. Eleanor recognized the signs from her father's stroke 20 years ago. The left side of his face had gone slack, but his right eye tracked Lila's face with desperate clarity. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine," Lila sang, her voice breaking. "You make me happy when skies are gray." Walter's hand twitched. Ruth knelt beside them, checking his pulse. "The ambulance is 3 minutes out," she said quietly. But her eyes told Eleanor what they all knew: 3 minutes might be too late. "Walter," Lila whispered, leaning close, "you're going to be okay. Remember what you taught me: bridges sway, but don't break." The old man's mouth worked soundlessly. Then, with enormous effort, he spoke clear as crystal, the fog of dementia lifting for one last moment. Tell Miranda I remember her every day. I remembered her, my daughter. Tell her." The bridge held. His hand found Lila's, squeezing with surprising strength. "You, angel, you brought me back. Thank you for seeing me." "I see you," Lila whispered. "I've always seen you." Walter's eyes shifted to Eleanor, standing frozen in the doorway. He smiled, half his face couldn't move. But somehow he smiled. "Your granddaughter. She's the best thing you ever built." Then his breathing changed, became shallow, peaceful. Lila held him tighter, singing louder as if her voice could hold him here. "You'll never know, dear, how much I love you." Walter Morrison, designer of bridges that carried millions safely home, died in the arms of a 20-year-old woman who'd given up $10 million to learn what really mattered. His last expression was peace. The paramedics arrived to find Lila still holding him, surrounded by 50 residents who'd formed a protective circle. They worked through the protocols, but it was ceremony now, not emergency. Eleanor pushed through the circle and dropped to her knees beside Lila, who was shaking violently. Her composure finally shattered. Without thinking, Eleanor pulled her granddaughter into her arms, the first real embrace in 15 years. "He's gone," Lila sobbed. "He was getting better. He remembered things yesterday. He wrote his whole name." "You gave him dignity," Eleanor whispered, her own tears falling. "You gave him love. You saw him when the world looked away." They stayed on that floor for an hour, holding each other while the coroner came, while Grace managed the logistics, while Harold led an impromptu memorial. Ruth found Walter's engineering medal in his room and placed it on his chest before they took him away. "We'll find his daughter," Harold announced to the room. "Miranda Morrison. He said she lived in Seattle in 1998. We'll find her and tell her he remembered." The sun was rising when Eleanor finally got Lila back to the hotel. Her granddaughter hadn't stopped shaking. Eleanor ran a bath, found clean clothes, forced her to eat something, mothering actions she'd never performed, learned now through desperate instinct. 63, Lila said suddenly. "What? I've held 63 people while they died in 2 years. Walter was 63. She looked at Eleanor with hollow eyes. "Is this what love costs? This pain?" Eleanor sat on the bathroom floor while Lila soaked in the tub and told her the truth. "Yes, but the alternative costs more." The next day, Eleanor made a decision. She called Thomas Wright. "Set up a meeting with Maggie, her lawyers, my lawyers, everyone. Time to end this. You want to prosecute. I want the truth. All of it. On record." The conference room at Morrison. Kravitz and associates had witnessed 1,000 family disasters, but the secretary would later say she'd never seen anything like the Hartwell meeting. Eleanor arrived with Thomas and 2 attorneys. Lila came alone. Despite Eleanor's protests, Maggie entered last, and Eleanor barely recognized her. Her sister had aged 20 years in 5. The designer clothes couldn't hide the hollow eyes, the trembling hands, the look of someone running on empty. She sat down without meeting anyone's eyes. Thomas laid out the evidence: methodically forged documents, embezzled funds, manipulation of a minor, fraud spanning years. Each piece of evidence was another nail. Maggie's lawyer, clearly realizing he'd been lied to, grew paler with each revelation. "The prosecution case is airtight," Eleanor's attorney said. 20 years minimum, possibly life given the amounts involved and the abuse of fiduciary duty. Maggie finally looked up. Her voice was flat, defeated. "I know." "Then why?" Eleanor's control cracked. "She was a child. Your niece, Daniel's daughter. Why?" Maggie laughed bitter. "Broken. You want to know why? Look in the mirror. You got everything. The company. The success. Mom and Dad's approval. Do you know what they said when they changed the will? Eleanor has the temperament for business. Margaret is too emotional. Emotional. Because I made one mistake. You stole $40,000. I had a problem. I needed help, not exile." Maggie's composure shattered entirely. "And you, perfect Eleanor. Golden Eleanor, you didn't even notice I was drowning. You were so busy building your empire you couldn't see your own sister dying inch by inch." She turned to Lila. "I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. I told myself I was protecting you from her coldness, but I was sick. Am sick." She pulled out a pill bottle, hands shaking. "These are keeping me alive. Barely. I've been planning to take them all once the money ran out. 6 months. The accountant says I have 6 months left." "Aunt Maggie," Lila started. "No." Maggie held up her hand. "I destroyed everything. Your trust fund, it's mostly gone. 500,000 left. I gambled it. Spent it. Threw it away trying to fill a hole that just got deeper. I'm exactly what Mom said I was: weak, emotional, a failure." Eleanor stood to leave, but Lila's voice stopped her. She's sick. Grandmother? She's a criminal. She's both. Lila moved to sit beside Maggie, taking her aunt's shaking hands. Hurt people hurt people. Isn't that what Walter always said? The question isn't what she did. We know that. The question is what we do now. She stole your childhood. Eleanor's voice rose. Your inheritance. Your future. No. Lila interrupted firmly. She gave me my purpose. If I'd grown up rich, would I have learned what I know now? Would I have met Walter, Harold, Ruth? Would I understand that wealth isn't money but connection? She looked at Maggie with compassion that seemed impossible. You're sick. Aunt Maggie, prison won't cure you, but treatment might. Treatment costs money, Maggie said bitterly. Real treatment, not the revolving door county programs. Eleanor watched her granddaughter, 20 years old, robbed of millions, holding the hands of the woman who'd done the robbing. The easy path was prosecution. Justice, clean and simple. But nothing about family was clean or simple. Pathways Recovery Center in Arizona, Eleanor said suddenly. 6 months minimum, world-class gambling addiction program. $50,000. I'll pay for it. Everyone stared. Eleanor continued, her voice steady now. Conditions: full confession to everything. In writing. Complete financial transparency going forward. The remaining $500,000 goes back to Lila immediately. And you actually work on getting better. Maggie's tears came in torrents. Why? You hate me. I hate what you did. But Lila's right. You're sick. And you're still my sister. Daniel wouldn't want this to end in prison. He'd want it to end in healing. The lawyers drew up the agreements. Maggie signed everything, her signature shaky but legal. The remaining trust fund money would be transferred to Lila within days. As they left the law office, Lila took both Eleanor and Maggie's hands. We're all broken, she said simply. The only choice is whether we break alone or together. That night, in the shelter's chapel, Lila shared her vision with Eleanor. They sat in the same pew where Lila had first revealed the truth, but everything had changed. I don't want the money for myself, Lila began. I want to create something Walter would be proud of, something that honors everyone here. She pulled out a notebook, pages covered with sketches and plans. Hartwell Haven, not just a shelter but a transformation center. Mental health services, job training, medical care, dignity restoration, named after the people society forgets Walter Morrison Hall, Ruth Chen Medical Center, Harold Baker Library. Eleanor studied the plans. They were ambitious, comprehensive, revolutionary. This would cost millions. 500 million, actually. Lila met her eyes. The exact amount of your net worth. The silence stretched between them. Outside, they could hear Harold reading poetry to the evening group, Ruth checking medications, Grace coordinating tomorrow's meals. You're asking me to give away everything I built. I'm asking you to build something better. With me. Lila's voice was soft but certain. Grandmother, you spent 30 years building an empire. What if we spent the next 30 building a legacy? Eleanor thought of Walter's words. Your granddaughter is the best thing you ever built. But Lila had built herself, despite Eleanor's absence, maybe because of it. The board would fight me. Shareholders would revolt. Hartwell Properties is privately held. You own 90%. Lila had done her homework. You could liquidate, establish a foundation, change thousands of lives. I'd have nothing left. Lila smiled Sarah's smile, earned through struggle. You'd have me. Isn't family worth more than $500 million? Eleanor looked at her granddaughter, really looked. 20 years old, wise beyond measure, offering forgiveness. Eleanor didn't deserve and partnership she'd never dreamed of. Walter's memorial is Thursday, Eleanor said finally. If we're going to announce this, that would be the time. Lila's eyes widened. You mean? I mean, I've spent my whole life building walls. Maybe it's time to build bridges. Eleanor pulled out her phone, called Thomas. I need you to draw up foundation papers. The Hartwell Haven Foundation. Equal partners, Lila and Eleanor Hartwell. She hung up and found Lila crying. He would be so proud, her granddaughter whispered. Walter, he'd say the bridge held after all. Eleanor pulled her close. This granddaughter she'd almost lost to fear and distance. Daniel would be proud too. He always said I was building an empire with no one to live in it. Now we'll build homes for everyone who needs one. They sat in the chapel until dawn, planning a future neither had imagined. Outside, Miami stirred to life. Inside the shelter, 50 people slept, unaware that 2 women were architecting their salvation. Harold found them there in the morning, still talking, surrounded by notebooks and dreams. Aristotle said wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants, he observed. Seems you've both discovered what he meant. We're going to build something beautiful, Lila told him. Harold smiled, his professor's insight shining through homeless circumstances. My dear, you already have. The rest is just construction. Luna's cancer revealed itself on a Tuesday morning, 3 days after Walter's memorial. The golden retriever, who'd been recovering well from her spleen surgery, suddenly couldn't stand. Ruth found her in the common room, trying desperately to reach her water bowl, her back legs refusing to cooperate. Metastatic, the veterinarian said after the scans. It spread to her spine and liver. She might have weeks, maybe a month. Lila sat on the examination room floor, Luna's gray muzzle in her lap. Can we manage her pain? Yes, but then we take her home. She dies with her family, not in a cage. The shelter rallied around their dying mascot. Harold read her Wordsworth. Ruth managed her medications with the precision she'd once applied to human patients. Grace set up a special bed in the common room so Luna could still be part of everything. Even the newer residents, who'd initially kept their distance, began taking shifts sitting with her. She knows, Lila told Eleanor one evening as they watched Luna's labored breathing. Dogs always know, but she's holding on for us. Eleanor had learned not to offer money for problems that couldn't be solved with checkbooks. Instead, she sat on the floor, something the old Eleanor would have considered beneath her, and stroked Luna's fur while Lila sang the old songs. 3 days later, Eleanor collapsed. She was serving breakfast. Had just handed Harold his over-easy eggs when the room tilted. The last thing she remembered was Lila's scream and Ruth's competent hands checking her pulse. She woke in Miami General's cardiac unit, machines beeping symphony around her. Lila sat beside the bed, still wearing the same clothes from that morning, holding Eleanor's hand like she might disappear. Stress-induced cardiomyopathy, the doctor explained. Broken heart syndrome, colloquially. Your heart muscle weakened from prolonged stress and sudden emotional upheaval. You're lucky no permanent damage, but you need to make serious lifestyle changes. How serious? Eleanor asked. You can't continue at your current pace. The stress of running a multi-million-dollar company while processing this much emotional change, your heart literally can't take it. Lila squeezed her hand. The foundation papers can wait. No. Eleanor's voice was weak but certain. If anything, this proves we need to move faster. I might not have as much time as I thought. Where that night, alone with her granddaughter in the hospital room, Eleanor voiced her deepest fear. I'm going to die like Daniel. Suddenly, with everything unfinished. You're not dying, Lila said firmly. We all are, just at different speeds. Eleanor stared at the ceiling. I've wasted 54 years building things instead of relationships. What if it's too late? It's not too late until it's over, Lila said, quoting Walter. He told me that every morning when he couldn't remember my name but tried anyway. Eleanor was discharged after 3 days with a bag of medications and strict orders to reduce stress. She returned to the shelter to find a notice posted on the door. Notice of eminent domain. Property to be acquired for commercial development in 30 days. Grace stood in the common room, addressing panicked residents. The city wants to build a shopping complex. They're offering the shelter 60 cents on the dollar for the property value. Non-negotiable. Can we fight it? Someone asked. With what money, what lawyers? Grace's despair was palpable. We have 30 days to find alternative housing for 50 people. Harold stood up. Professor Mode activated despite his circumstances. This is social cleansing. They push out the poor to make room for the wealthy. It's been happening in Miami for decades. But where will we go? Ruth asked quietly. The silence was crushing. Everyone knew the answer: the streets, other overcrowded shelters, or worse. Eleanor started to speak. She could buy another building. Fight the city legally, but Lila caught her eye and shook her head. This was the community's battle first. Over the next week, they tried everything. Letters to city council members went unanswered. A protest outside City Hall drew 12 people and no media. Local news ran a 30-second segment that was immediately forgotten. The GoFundMe raised $3,000, not enough for even a month's rent on a suitable replacement building. We're invisible, Harold said bitterly during what might be their last philosophy circle. Society needs us to exist so they can feel superior, but they need us to exist somewhere else. Then the call came about Maggie. Eleanor was reviewing hopeless legal strategies when Thomas Wright called. Your sister attempted suicide at Pathways Recovery. She's alive but in critical condition. Eleanor and Lila drove through the night to Arizona, taking turns at the wheel, not talking much. The rehabilitation center was a sprawling complex in the desert, beautiful and isolated. They found Maggie in the medical wing, sedated, wrists bandaged. She'd been doing well, the counselor explained, participating in groups, making progress. Then yesterday, she got a letter, went straight to her room, and he gestured helplessly. If her roommate hadn't found her. The letter was from a lawyer. One of Maggie's gambling creditors had discovered her location, was pursuing legal action. Even in recovery, her past wouldn't let her go. Maggie woke while they were there, her eyes focused on Eleanor first, then Lila. You came, she whispered, surprised. Of course we came, Lila said. Why? Maggie's voice was broken glass. I destroyed everything. I'm the family poison. You'd be better off if I'd succeeded. Eleanor wanted to agree, wanted to list every hurt, every betrayal. But she looked at this broken woman, her sister, her only remaining blood relative besides Lila, and saw not a villain, but a casualty. You're sick, Eleanor said simply. Not evil, sick. What's the difference? Maggie asked. Sick can be treated. Lila answered. Evil is a choice. You didn't choose to be an addict any more than Walter chose to have Alzheimer's or Luna chose cancer. Maggie turned her face to the wall. I chose to hurt you. You chose to feed your sickness, Eleanor corrected, surprising herself with compassion she didn't know she possessed. There's a difference. They stayed for 3 days. Eleanor handled the creditor situation with terrifying efficiency, paying debts, setting up protections, ensuring Maggie could focus on recovery without legal harassment. Lila spent hours just sitting with her aunt, not talking much, just being present. On the last day, Maggie asked, What happens when I get out? Where do I go? Hartwell Haven, Lila said without hesitation. We're building places for people to heal. You'll be one of the first residents. Nobody deserves grace, Eleanor interrupted. That's what makes it grace. They drove back to Miami in contemplative silence. The shelter crisis awaited them. Luna was dying. Eleanor's heart was literally broken, and Maggie might not survive her own demons. The Hartwell family seemed to be disintegrating just as they'd found each other. Sometimes, Lila said as Miami's skyline appeared, things have to fall completely apart before they can be rebuilt properly. They returned to find Luna could no longer walk at all. Ruth had set up a morphine drip illegally obtained, but compassionately administered. The dog's breathing was shallow, but her tail still thumped weakly when Lila knelt beside her. It's okay, girl, Lila whispered. You can let go. That night, Haven of Hope's residents held vigil. 50 people who society had discarded sat in a circle around one dying dog, sharing stories of how she'd comforted them. Harold recited Rainbow Bridge from memory. Ruth sang hymns from her childhood. Even the newest residents, the ones who pretended not to care about anything, wiped away tears. At 3:47 a.m., with Lila singing You Are My Sunshine and Eleanor holding her paw, Luna took her last breath. She went peacefully, surrounded by more love than most humans ever experience. They buried her in the shelter's small garden as the sun rose. Grace planted jasmine over the grave, because she made everything sweeter just by being here. Eleanor stood between her broken granddaughter and the condemned shelter, watching 50 homeless people mourn a dog with more ceremony than society would give most of them. Her broken heart, literally and figuratively, somehow kept beating. 22 days, Grace said quietly. That's all we have left. Eleanor wanted to fix it, to write a check, to call lawyers. But she was learning that some problems required more than money. They required miracles. And Eleanor Hartwell, who'd built an empire on practical calculations, was finally beginning to believe in miracles. Thomas Wright's call came at dawn, 17 days before the shelter's eviction. Eleanor was sitting in the garden beside Luna's grave when her phone rang. You need to sit down, Thomas said. I am sitting. Eleanor, I found something. During my investigation into Maggie's fraud, I pulled every financial record connected to Daniel's estate. There's a policy nobody knew about. Eleanor's chest tightened. Her damaged heart couldn't take many more surprises. What kind of policy? Life insurance. Separate from his estate planning. Purchased through a different company. Northwestern Mutual. $50 million policy. Purchased 6 months before the crash. That's impossible. I handled his estate personally. He set it up to be invisible until Lila turned 21. That's next month. But here's the thing, it's been accumulating interest for 15 years. Current value is $75 million. Eleanor couldn't breathe. Who's the beneficiary? Lila, solely and completely. And Eleanor, there's a letter. Thomas emailed the scanned document. Daniel's handwriting, shaky as if written in emotional distress, filled 2 pages. My dearest Lila, if you're reading this, then my premonitions were right, and Sarah and I are gone. Last week, I dreamed of the plane falling. Sarah says I'm being morbid, but something tells me to prepare. This money isn't for Harvard or Yale, or whatever Eleanor will think constitutes a proper education. This is for your true education, the School of Life, the University of Compassion, the Graduate Program of Human Understanding. Eleanor will provide for your material needs. She's brilliant at that, but she doesn't understand that wealth isn't what you keep, it's what you give. She doesn't know that the greatest inheritance I can leave you isn't money, but the capacity to see others' humanity. I trust that somehow this will find you when you're ready, when you've learned what matters, when you understand that every fortune built on forgetting the forgotten is no fortune at all. Use this to remember the forgotten. That's your inheritance, not the money, but the mission. Your mother and I love you beyond words. If we're gone, find the angels among the abandoned. They'll teach you what we couldn't. All my love. Dad. Eleanor read it 3 times before she could speak. When Lila arrived, coffee in hand for their morning ritual, Eleanor wordlessly handed her the phone. Lila read in silence, tears streaming. He knew. He always had premonitions, Eleanor whispered. I called him paranoid. $75 million? Lila's voice was wondering. We could save the shelter, build 20 more, change everything. But Eleanor was staring at one line. Every fortune built on forgetting the forgotten is no fortune at all. Her empire, her life's work, had it all been built on forgetting that afternoon. A different revelation emerged. Maggie's therapy team called requesting a family session via video. The counselor, a gentlewoman named Patricia, sat beside Maggie, who looked hollowed out but present. Maggie has something to share, Patricia said. Something that recontextualizes everything. Maggie's voice was barely audible. When I was 14, Mom and Dad's friend Richard, he... She stopped, started again. He raped me, multiple times, during those business dinners when you were at debate camp. Eleanor. Eleanor's world tilted. You never said, I tried. Mom said I was making things up for attention. Dad said Richard was too important a client to accuse without proof. They sent me to therapy, but not for trauma, for attention-seeking behavior. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The gambling starting in high school. The self-destruction. The rage at Eleanor for being believed about everything when Maggie wasn't believed about the most important thing. That's why they changed the will. Maggie continued. Not just the stealing. They said I was unstable. Dramatic. The 40,000 I took, I was trying to run away. Start over somewhere, nobody knew me. Eleanor wanted to vomit. Their parents, pillars of Richmond society, had protected a predator and punished his victim. Maggie, I'm so sorry. I never knew. Because they made sure you wouldn't. Perfect Eleanor couldn't know about the family shame. Maggie's bitter laugh held decades of pain. I hated you for being the golden child, but you were just another kind of victim. They isolated us from each other. Patricia intervened gently. Trauma explains behavior without excusing it. Maggie still takes responsibility for her choices, but understanding the root helps healing begin. After the call, Eleanor and Lila sat in stunned silence. Everything they'd believed about their family was wrong. The fortune, the success, the Hartwell legacy, all built on buried violence and silenced truth. She never had a chance, Lila said finally. None of us did, Eleanor replied. We were all playing roles assigned by people who were too broken to write a different script. That evening, Harold gave his usual philosophy talk, but tonight was different. Someone had brought a smartphone, decided to live stream it on TikTok as a joke. Homeless professor drops truth bombs. Harold, unaware he was being filmed, delivered his most powerful lecture yet. Poverty isn't about laziness. I published 12 books, had tenure, shaped minds that went on to Congress. But I backed the wrong political candidate. And suddenly, my research funding vanished. My position was eliminated. My reputation destroyed by whispers. 1 year from Princeton to pavement. Ruth here saved 300 lives as a head nurse. But when her husband got cancer, she had to choose between his life and their home. She chose love. Society called that a bad investment. Walter designed bridges that millions drive across daily. His mind, that brilliant instrument, simply broke, through no fault of his own. The synapses that calculated load-bearing capacities now couldn't remember his daughter's name. We aren't lazy. We aren't worthless. We are you. 5 bad decisions or 1 illness or 1 tragedy away. The only difference between us and you watching this is that our safety nets had holes. And we fell through. The video exploded overnight. By morning, it had 3 million views. By noon, #Harold the Philosopher was trending. By evening, news crews were lined up outside Haven of Hope. But it was Grace who understood how to use the moment. She organized the residents, prepared them to tell their stories, not as victims, but as humans. The GoFundMe relaunched with a new video Harold teaching, Ruth providing medical care, others sharing their expertise even in homelessness. 2 days later, a call from the Fairfield Foundation, they'd seen the video, were offering a $2 million emergency grant. The next day, 3 more foundations called. Individual donations poured in. A group of Princeton alumni, discovering Harold's identity, started a campaign that raised another $1 million. The city council meeting that week was packed. Eleanor watched from the back as resident after resident spoke. But it was Lila who delivered the killing blow. You want to tear down Haven of Hope to build a shopping center? Let me tell you what you're really tearing down. You're destroying the place where Walter Morrison, who designed the Bay Bridge approach that saves lives in every earthquake, spent his last days with dignity, where Harold Baker, whose books shaped a generation of thinkers, continues teaching despite having nothing. Where Ruth Chen, who ran Miami General's emergency room for 30 years, now tends to those the hospital turned away. But more than that, you're telling every person struggling that their life has less value than retail space. That human dignity can be priced per square foot. That's not development, that's social murder. She sat down to thunderous applause. The council voted 2 hours later. The eminent domain order was reversed. Haven of Hope would remain. That night, as the shelter celebrated, Eleanor found Harold in the garden, sitting by Luna's grave. Aristotle was wrong, he said quietly. He said knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. But it's not. Knowing others, really seeing them, that's where wisdom begins. Eleanor thought of Daniel's letter, of Maggie's truth, of Walter's bridges and Luna's love and Lila's sacrifice. My brother knew that. He tried to teach me, but I was too busy building to listen. You're listening now, Harold observed. That's all any of us can do, start listening when we finally hear. The reversal was complete. The shelter was saved, Maggie's truth was revealed, Daniel's gift had surfaced, and Eleanor finally understood the empire she'd built was nothing compared to the community Lila had found. $75 million could change everything. But first, Eleanor had to change herself. The press conference was held in Haven of Hope's common room, exactly where Walter had died in Lila's arms 6 weeks earlier. Eleanor stood beside her granddaughter, facing a room packed with reporters, residents, and city officials. Thomas Wright had prepared extensive legal documents, but the announcement itself was simple. Effective immediately, Eleanor said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I'm liquidating Hartwell Properties' entire portfolio, the resulting $500 million, combined with the $75 million from my brother Daniel's insurance policy, will establish the Hartwell Haven Foundation. Gasps rippled through the room. A reporter shouted, "You're giving away everything." "No," Eleanor corrected. "I'm investing in everything that matters. My granddaughter taught me that wealth isn't what you hoard, it's what you build for others." Lila stepped forward. "The first Hartwell Haven will be built right here in Miami. Not a shelter, but a transformation center. Walter Morrison Hall for engineering and technical training, Ruth Chen Medical Center for free health care, Harold Baker Library for continuing education, each building named for someone society forgot but who never forgot their humanity." "This is insane," a financial reporter called out. "You're destroying generational wealth." Eleanor smiled, the first genuine smile caught on camera in her entire career. "We're creating generational healing. That's worth more than any fortune." Within 6 months, construction began on the first Hartwell Haven. The architecture was revolutionary, designed not for efficiency but for dignity. Private rooms instead of bunks, gardens between buildings, a commercial kitchen for both meals and culinary training, medical facilities rivaling private hospitals. The philosophy was simple: treat people like they matter, and they'll remember they do. Maggie arrived from Arizona as the foundation was being poured. 8 months sober, 40 pounds healthier, but still fragile. Eleanor had arranged a position for her not as family obligation, but as recognition of her unique qualifications. "You understand addiction," Eleanor told her sister. "That makes you invaluable as our recovery program director." Maggie cried, but for the first time in decades, they were tears of purpose rather than pain. She moved into a small apartment near the construction site, attending daily AA meetings with Harold, who'd become an unlikely sponsor. "Philosophy and recovery are similar," Harold explained during one of their walks. "Both require rigorous honesty about who you are versus who you pretend to be." Ruth, now housed in a senior apartment Eleanor had quietly purchased, consulted on the medical facility design. "Poor people don't need different medicine," she insisted. "They need the same medicine rich people get with dignity intact." A year after Walter's death, they held the memorial. The first Hartwell Haven was nearly complete, its modern buildings rising from the site of the old shelter. 300 people attended, former residents who'd found housing, volunteers who'd become family, city officials who'd once tried to destroy the shelter and now claimed credit for its transformation. Harold, now writer-in-residence at the Foundation, read from his new book, Wisdom from the Margins, What the Forgotten Taught Me About Being Human. A major publisher had offered a significant advance, which he donated entirely to the Foundation. Grace Thompson, promoted to National Director of Operations, announced that 4 more Hartwell Havens were already in development: Los Angeles, Chicago, Detroit, and Richmond. Lila insisted on Richmond, she said, glancing at the Hartwell women. Sometimes you have to heal where the hurt began. The Thanksgiving celebration was held in the completed Walter Morrison Hall. 200 people gathered: residents, graduates, volunteers, staff. The tables were set with donated china that didn't match, flowers picked from the garden, and food prepared by graduates of the culinary program. Eleanor stood to speak, but words failed her. She looked at Maggie, 2 years sober, helping serve cranberry sauce; at Grace, who'd transformed grief into purpose; at Harold and Ruth, teaching classes to people society had written off; at the photographs on the wall: Walter, Luna, Daniel, Sarah, and so many others gone but not forgotten. Family, Eleanor finally managed, isn't just blood. It's everyone who shows up when showing up is all that matters. Lila stood beside her grandmother, adding, "My father wrote that wealth is what you give, not what you keep. Everyone here has given more than any billionaire ever could. You gave your hearts, your stories, your refusal to let suffering make you cruel. That's the real fortune." After dinner, Eleanor, Lila, and Maggie found themselves washing dishes together. The industrial dishwasher had broken that morning. 3 generations of Hartwell women, hands in soapy water, laughing about burned rolls and lumpy gravy. "I spent 50 years avoiding this," Eleanor said, scrubbing a particularly stubborn pan. "Connection, messiness, love, the mess is the point," Maggie replied, her sobriety having brought unexpected wisdom. "Clean is just another word for empty." A 4-month-old golden retriever puppy tumbled into the kitchen. The residents had named her Hope, Luna's spiritual successor. She carried a dish rag in her mouth, tail wagging furiously. Lila picked up the puppy, holding her close. "You know what Dad would say if he could see this?" Eleanor and Maggie waited. "He'd say the bridge held. Despite everything, the crashes, the betrayals, the pain, the bridge held." Outside, snow began falling, the first snow in Miami's recorded history, a meteorological impossibility that would make headlines worldwide. But inside Walter Morrison Hall, nobody noticed the miracle. They were too busy creating their own one dish, one laugh, one healing moment at a time. Eleanor looked at her ruined manicure, her designer dress splattered with dishwater, her granddaughter teaching her sister how to properly dry crystal glasses. Her empire was gone, her fortune dispersed, her carefully constructed life demolished. She'd never been richer. The final frame would have been worthy of Daniel's vision: 3 broken women made whole not by money, but by choosing each other, surrounded by hundreds of forgotten people who'd been remembered, in a building named for a bridge designer whose greatest creation was the connection between human hearts. "Love," Sarah had whispered in her last moments, "is a verb, not a noun." Finally, 15 years later, the Hartwell women understood what she meant. You know, I've told you this story about Eleanor and Lila because I see myself in it. Maybe you do too. We spend our lives building walls disguised as achievements, sending money instead of messages, choosing safety over connection because love feels too dangerous to risk. Eleanor thought she was protecting everyone by keeping her distance. Maggie thought revenge would heal her wounds. Lila thought sacrifice meant suffering alone. They were all wrong, and they were all doing their best with broken tools inherited from broken people. But here's what Walter knew. Dying in a homeless shelter after designing bridges that saved thousands, the only wealth that matters is measured in the moments we truly see each other. Not look at, really see. The way Lila saw him. Brilliant and broken. Worthy of dignity in his confusion. Every family has its Walter, someone forgotten, dismissed, written off. Every heart has its shelter, a place where we hide our true selves, afraid of judgment. And every life has its moment of choice: keep building walls or start building bridges. The $10 million never mattered. The 500 million given away meant nothing compared to 3 women washing dishes together. Finally understanding that love isn't a noun, it's every verb that says, I choose to stay. That's all family has ever been.